Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my review of the Sirui Sniper 75mm F1.2. Now, Sirui Sniper series of lenses is their series of autofocusing fast aperture f1.2 prime lenses that was released starting in 2023. And I reviewed the initial series of the 23, 33, and then 56mm f1.2 lenses in 2023, but they are back in 2024 with the 16mm f1.2 that I just reviewed, and then the 75mm f1.2. These two new lenses are definitely superior, in my opinion, to the initial series of lenses and have kind of raised the bar in terms of the optical performance here, and that's particularly true of the 75mm f1.2. Now, there is already, of course, an exceptional 75mm f1.2 available for multiple mounts like this lens, and that's the Viltrox Pro AF 75mm f1.2. As we're going to see, however, the Sirui is a fairly good alternative in some ways because it is smaller, lighter, and cheaper, and at about $349 offers up a pretty strong value, even though the Viltrox is a little bit more feature-rich. So we'll dive into all of that in today's review. So 75mm is a full frame equivalent of 112.5 millimeters. So the least conventional focal length, we have essentially the full frame equivalent of 24, 35, 50, and 85 millimeters in the first four lenses. And so this falls somewhere in between 100 and 135 millimeters. So not necessarily a conventional focal length, but while it maybe isn't as flexible as some of the other focal lengths, it does produce really stunning images. And I actually quite like the focal length on APS-C. And of course, this is an APS-C only specific lens, and so you can get it on Fuji X mount, which I'm testing here, also on Nikon Z and Sony E mounts as well. As with all of the Sniper series, there are three different finish options. And so there's a black, a white, and a silver finish. And all of these have a unique design element as a part of it. The black that I'm reviewing here has a carbon fiber element. The silver series has some aluminum alloy in the frame. And then the white series has a ceramic kind of paint section in there. And so all of them have some unique design qualities to them, and they are quite attractive lenses with very distinct looks from everything else that's basically on the market. So considering how many lenses are on the market at this point, I do give Sirui kudos for their design philosophies. It isn't just copying what everyone else is doing at this point. So this lens is very slightly the largest of the series. Most of these have kept a very similar profile, and in terms of length, they're all within a millimeter of each other. But this is a little bit wider to accommodate those bigger glass elements. But still, for a 75mm f1.2, it is small and lightweight. 75 millimeters in diameter, so just a few millimeters wider, and it is 94 millimeters in length. So that's 2.95 inches by 3.7 inches. It weighs in at 466 grams, or right over 16 ounces, right over a pound. It has a slightly larger front filter thread, again, because you have to accommodate bigger glass elements. All the rest of the series has been 58 millimeters up front. This is 67 millimeters. Still a very, very common filter size that is going to be shared with a lot of other lenses, just unfortunately not the rest of the Sniper series. As noted, this is smaller and lighter than the Viltrox lens. I noted this is 75 by 94 millimeters. The Viltrox is 87, considerably wider, by 101 millimeters, considerably longer. The Viltrox weighs in at 670 grams. So this is 205 grams lighter. And so if that happens to be a priority for you and you just find the Viltrox just a little bit too large, this is a great alternative because it is smaller and considerably lighter. Now, there is no, as with all of these lenses, there is no extra switches or features on here. They do have really good style elements, as I've mentioned here, including a diamond pattern grip surface that's a little bit different than the typical ribs you find on most manual focus rings. Manual focus ring works good here, about 360 degrees of rotation. I prefer a very slightly heavier damping, but it doesn't feel bad at all. It has some decent feel to it. I do find as kind of a Fuji quirk, as if you want to get all the way to minimum focus distance, it's not just 360 degrees. You have to rotate just a little bit more to get it to get there. So anyway, just something to consider. All of these sniper lenses do have a USB-C port in the lens mount that does allow for firmware updates, which is always good because it leaves room for improvements to autofocus performance, make sure that they're going to be future-proof in terms of compatibility. So a very important feature to have. We do have an included lens hood. The hoods are not quite as nice as the lenses. They're a little bit more plasticky feeling. The only thing that concession to something good is the fact that there is a rib section, kind of like what Sigma does, that allows you to grip it better. It does bayonet into place tightly. However, it feels kind of like you're jamming it there at the end rather than a nice lock. And so there's precision in the bayonet on any of these lens hoods. It leaves a little bit to be desired in my experience at this point. One thing that I do love is that inside we have 11 rounded aperture blades, and as you can see, this creates a beautiful looking aperture iris. So much glass here, and so you can look in and see that. The aperture iris looks fantastic, and on the practical side, as you can see, even when it's closed all the way down, it's still maintaining a nicely circular shape. None of these sniper lenses have been great when it comes to minimum focus distance and maximum magnification. This 75mm is ever so slightly better than the rest of the series. Most of them have leveled off at a magnification very low of around 0.10 times. This is a little bit higher. I estimated it about 0.12 times. You can focus as close as 70 centimeters. This is an area that is improved over the Viltrox, by the way. The Viltrox, I think it's only about 85 centimeters you can focus, and so you get a lower magnification level. So as you can see, it does give you a reasonable amount, and of course with that huge maximum aperture, you can get close enough to obliterate backgrounds. And so I still find it useful even though the magnification isn't super high. So overall, a fairly nice build, but not a lot in terms of features. Unfortunately, no aperture ring here on Fuji, which we're accustomed to having for just about every lens. Now on the autofocus side of things, this has not been a huge area of strength for these Sniper series lenses on Fuji. But then again, everything's a little bit worse on Fuji when it comes to autofocus, unfortunately. So it's a little bit hard for me, as I've reviewed all of these on Fuji, to kind of differentiate the lens performance versus the camera system liabilities. But I'll just have to report on what I see here. Just note that what I see may be a little bit better on some other platforms where focus is better. So autofocus speed here via the STM focus motor it's about average. It's not bad really for stills. You can see a visible step in the process, but it gets there quick enough. It feels like there's a little bit more thrust in this focus motor to accommodate for the bigger elements. And so autofocus speed, if anything, is actually probably better than some of the other lenses in the series. So that is progress in the right direction. The actual motor itself is relatively quiet. You can hear some light whirring and clicking if you put it right next to your ear, but unfortunately there is a fair amount of noise when it comes to the actual focus process, and it has to do with the fact that the way that Fuji's autofocus works is that the aperture blades close to like a middle position, f2.8, f3.5, somewhere in that range. And so they either open up or close down depending on what your preset aperture is. But it goes back to that other state in between. Every time if I have to press it, it takes me to my preset aperture. If I take it back off, it either opens or closes back down with the aperture blades. What that ends up doing is because the aperture blade mechanism is not particularly quiet, you will hear just a little bit of a clacking sound as it opens and closes. So it does make the autofocus process a little bit noisier than what it would otherwise be. Now, I did find that my focus accuracy, even at f1.2, was actually quite useful. So that's great. And I found that, I was able to pinpoint accuracy with a variety of shots. If my target was basically moving slowly or not moving. I did find that, for example, with shots of Nala, if she was coming progressively towards the camera, I just found a consistent back focus. It wasn't nailing at the iris, it was a little behind, and so it's not great for tracking action. But outside of that, things worked pretty well. Now, when it comes to video AF, you can really see that this is a stepping motor. You can see in these focus pulls that I counted, there's about 4 different steps that you can just count, either going or coming in any one of those focus pulls. So obviously it's not that nice, seamless, movement back and forth. It's not cinematic, it's a little bit steppy. And so I don't love that regard, obviously. I also found that for my hand test that the lens was just really bulky too. It didn't want to focus on either my hand or my face. It just didn't want to start focus, period. And when I finally, got its attention and started focusing, it's still not reactive, and so I'd move my hand out of the way, may or may not start focus, and it would be slow enough that by the time I moved my hand back, it hadn't really locked focus on my eye. And so really not great for video work. Unfortunately, I do know that a big chunk of this is due to the Fuji platform. Everything else that I test is just much better in these video-related autofocus tests than on any of the other platforms. Doesn't seem to matter what lens I'm testing. And so, unfortunately, that's part and parcel of the Fuji experience. So know that you will probably get a little bit better results on Sony or Nikon. I will also say that there is some noticeable focus breathing there, and so if that's going to be an issue for you, maybe not the best lens for you in that regard. So, conclusion is the autofocus for stills actually worked fine for me as long as I wasn't trying to shoot action. I had good precision. Focus was quiet enough, I didn't really notice it, and fast enough that it didn't get in my way at all. So that was fine, but I wouldn't advise this lens for either action or for video work if that's your top priority. So finally, let's talk about image quality, and I will follow this up at the end of the video with a deep dive breakdown, but I'll give you the overview here. Optical formula, and this is 13 elements in 9 groups. This is the standout of the Sniper series optically. A lot of these lenses that I've looked at them and I've tried to find the strengths amongst some pretty obvious weaknesses. But in this case, I'm kind of unequivocal. I really do like the optical performance here. It starts, with some great metrics. You can see that when it comes to distortion, I found nothing to correct for. It is distortion free. As far as vignette, even at f1.2, I only found that I needed a +45 to correct in the corners. And so that is just about a little over a stop, about a stop and a quarter. That's not bad at all. And so great there. I also found that unlike the 56mm had atrocious amounts of longitudinal chromatic aberration, fringing before and after the plane of focus. This is not quite entirely neutral, but it has so minimal fringing that it just wasn't an issue in any of my real world shots or my test shots. So I was very happy with it in that regard. I saw minimal amounts of lateral chromatic aberrations near the corners with the lens stopped down, but only at very high magnifications and only if I was looking for it specifically. It didn't actually pop up in real world shots. So very good control of fringing as well. The contrast and resolution wide open is actually good, even on this super demanding 40 megapixel, Fuji X-Trans sensor. This is the most demanding platform I test on, and it held up actually quite well. A very usable amount of contrast in the center, and even the corners were actually quite decent. And so I found that I could shoot shots where it was composed towards the corners, even at f1.2. They looked fine. And so that is great there. It's not like the Viltrox level. Viltrox in the center of the frame is just amazingly sharp and high contrast, even at f1.2. It's not quite that level, but it does find a really nice balance between sharpness and then really softness of the bokeh. In that sense, I feel like it has a flavor that's similar to the Fuji 33mm f1.4 or 1.4 WR lens, a lens that I really liked the balance from. And I think that this is a really nicely balanced lens. You'll find that that contrast will dramatically improve as you stop it on down. It gets better still by f2. It's excellent. Corners are super sharp by f4. You'll find that at landscape apertures, you're getting really crisp, highly detailed results. I'm very pleased with that. Diffraction is going to start to show up by f11 on the high resolution body. By f16 it is more noticeable, f16 being minimum aperture here. The standout here to me is the overall rendering and the bokeh. This produces gorgeous bokeh. Very soft, very creamy. It's very easy to get nice bokeh, and I shot in a variety of conditions and I really never saw anything that I thought wasn't good looking. I thought that the bokeh really held up well in a variety of situations. Really gorgeous. So that's a standout here. Flare resistance, it's not perfect, but it's not bad for a very large aperture telephoto lens. I get a little bit of ghosting artifacts, but nothing that ever becomes image destructive, in my opinion. And so I think overall it's quite good. I even shot coma because I happened to be testing the 16mm. So I was like, going out, I'm going to shoot it at night. Might as well throw on the 75mm as well. And the results were fine. It's not necessarily a focal length that I always reach for shooting astro, but star points are nice and clean. There's a little bit of kind of coma deformation towards the corner, but actually lower level of coma than what I saw on the 16mm. And so, and of course, there's low vignette, huge maximum aperture that can suck in light. Yeah, there's a lot to recommend even for shooting the night sky with this lens. So in conclusion, this is my favorite lens of the series. It's not the most versatile in terms of the focal length, but I love the optical performance. It's not maybe as great as the Viltrox Pro AF 75mm f1.2 in some metrics, certainly not as feature rich or as well made. But it is a beautiful optical performance in what is a lighter, cheaper lens. And I think that obviously has its own attraction there. The autofocus, as pointed out, is not overly sophisticated, but it's good enough to work for most people. And if you're looking at one of these other platforms, I think that you'll like it better still on either Nikon or Sony. At the end of the day, what helps this lens a lot is that it is very competitively priced. And as I've said, it reminds me optically of a lens like that Fuji 33mm f1.4, though obviously at something that is close to a third of the price. The fact that it has such a nice nuanced performance even on the demanding 40 megapixel sensor is impressive to me. So this is, of all the series, if you're just looking, saying I really would love a 75mm lens or a longer bright telephoto lens, this is one that is certainly worth considering. Now, if you want more information, you can look in my written review, which is linked to in the description down below. There's also an image gallery link there, buying links, and beyond that, if you want a deeper dive into the optics, stay tuned with me right now. We'll jump into it.
So we'll start by taking a look at vignette and distortion. As you saw previously, there is no distortion to correct here. So on the right, it's the exact same. I haven't done anything there. The vignette, I used a +45 to correct for. Really a very clean result for being such a large maximum aperture. We can see from this result that while there is the tiniest amount of fringing before and after the plane of focus, you can see a little bit of magenta there, a little bit of a green-blue there. For the most part, though, this is very, very minimal, and it didn't really show up in real-world shots. You take, for example, this shot of, this is actually raspberry blossoms that are coming, and you can see as you look at the flowers here, this is high transition, high contrast stuff. You can see, though, that fringing is just really well controlled, and so that allows there to be better contrast and not that bleeding around the edges that we saw with the 56mm. Now here at an extreme level of magnification, more than 200%, you can see there is the tiniest bit of lateral chromatic aberration here at the very edge of the frame, but it's so minimal that it's not going to be a real factor. I didn't see it in real-world images at all. So a good control of these aspects. So let's take a look at resolution and contrast. This is f1.2, and you're going to see these results at 200% magnification on a 40 megapixel XH2 sensor. So in the center of the frame, good detail, good contrast, a nice strong result. Mid-frame also looks pretty good here, and as we pan down, we can see holding up well here. As we get to the corners, I'm actually pretty impressed. We can see, if anything, it's actually almost better here than it is here, and so there's a little bit of a rebound there. Now, to put this in context, I've got the Viltrox 75mm f1.2 here on the right, both of them at f1.2. So we can see, looking in the middle of the frame, that the Viltrox is just really pops. Like I said, it's got a whole extra level of contrast and detail. Mid-frame also is a clear win. However, as we look towards the corners, while the Viltrox, I would say, is a winner, it is by the very smallest of margins. It has a little bit more contrast, but you can see as far as the detail and all the various textures, it is very close here on the sniper lens. Now, if we stop the sniper down to f1.4, we can see that contrast does boost a bit. That's true also here in the mid-frame, where you can just see the darks are darker, the whites are brighter. And down into the corner, it is very moderate improvement here, but a bit of improvement. You'll see a more notable improvement in the corners from f1.4 to f2 as shown here. If we look over here in the mid frame, you can see that it's now super sharp at f2. Very strong result. Panning over a little bit further, we can see again a significant improvement there at f2. Looking in the upper left corner, it's looking considerably better there as well. And finally, the right corner, much improved, and so we can see a fairly decent centering here as well. Now at f2.8 and then at f4, we can see that the center looks fantastic. We can see that the mid-frame, particularly here at f4, mid-frame is just sparkling, and down into the corner, we can see the corner is starting to look really strong here by f4, and better still by f5.6. We see that same strong performance through f8, with a mild drop-off due to diffraction at f11, but you can see by f16, minimum aperture here, the image is dramatically softened due to diffraction. Probably want to avoid there. Now, if the sniper lens can't quite match the overall contrast and detail of the Viltrox, it certainly can match it when it comes to the bokeh, and probably even exceed it a bit. This is really some of the nicer bokeh that I have seen. It's really good at creating that overall just creamy effect where backgrounds just completely disappear. And you can see here at close focus distances, everything before and after the plane of focus will just vanish on you. I went a little further back and I find that the combination of contrast and detail, there's enough of it there that it looks great, and then the background also looks beautiful in its defocus. Again, here at about 6 feet, 2 meters away, you can see the background is beautifully blurred away. Get a little bit closer and that blur starts to increase, and if you get really close, minimum focus distance, here, in the midst of other blades of grass, it is just completely disappeared, beautifully blurred out. This is probably the worst result that I could get as far as the flare performance. You can see there's a little bit more of a ghosting pattern, but for the most part, I actually saw quite good results. Here's another shot where I'm shooting through the slats, and you can see that really the amount of flare is fine here. In this shot where I've got the sun right in the frame, there's a little bit of a ghosting pattern here, but contrast is held up. It's certainly not falling apart. Then finally, going back to coma for a moment, let's look at the night sky here. You can see around these really bright points, star points, or galaxies, you can see that there really is not much there in terms of fringing. So that is impressive. If we go towards the very corner, you can see that the star points are no longer perfectly round, but neither are they growing wings or anything, so it looks fine. Then, of course, that very bright maximum aperture means that it helps a lot. I shot at f1.2 here, and I shot at only ISO 1600, which allows me to get cleaner in results because the lens can suck in so much light. So overall, while it's not as contrasty as the Viltrox lens, I do think that this lens finds a really nice blend between sharpness, contrast, but then also the very creamy bokeh and just nice rendering in general.
So thank you for hanging around till the end, and I hope that the optical breakdown has given you a better sense of the overall performance of this lens and can help you to make an informed decision as to whether or not it's a lens for you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.